sensible, and I think inarguable. Because we have learned from history, and by God, how rarely we do, but history tells us that the failures of policy that are supposed to lift up Indigenous people and put them on a par with the rest of us, that those policies fail, where the policy makers do not listen to Indigenous advice. And there have been some outstanding examples of where Indigenous policy has worked, and almost invariably it's because Indigenous people, who are the ones who are going to be on the receiving end of those policies, and often a significant part of delivering them, were consulted and were listened to. So you give permanency to this voice, which started with Gough Whitlam. 67 referendum gave the federal government for the first time the right to make policy on behalf of Indigenous people, to help Indigenous people, not harm them, hopefully. But 72, Gough Whitlam introduced the first genuinely Indigenous voice. After 67, the then Prime Minister Harold Holt, his idea of an Indigenous voice to Parliament was 3 white men. That was the voice to Parliament on behalf of Indigenous Australians that he was listening to before he disappeared off the beach at Portsea. So one was a former head of the Reserve Bank, another was a former diplomat, and the third one was Bill Stanner, who at least had some understanding of Indigenous issues, but he was not Indigenous. So it went from Gough to Fraser to Hawke to Keating to Howard and so on. And virtually every time you had a change of government, the voice changed. Occasionally a government came in and wanted to improve it, but as often as not, a government came in that either weakened or, in the case of John Howard and Atsic, abolished it. And after Howard, the checkerboard has been the same. Various voices, they've come and they've gone, and we still see the gaps. And in fact, if anything, the gaps in most cases are growing wider. So if you were still struggling to understand why the voice has to be enshrined in the Constitution, there it is. With permanence, we will see that genuine voice to Parliament, genuinely elected from Indigenous communities, representing and consulting